Hi, today we're going to talk about the monster center. And no better opening yields this kind of center than the Sicilian defense. One of the most popular defenses for strong players when they want to beat an opponent. Used throughout years in the World Championship matches by Kasparov, Fischer, their weapon of choice. Even Carlsen. So many great players. And now we're going back to 1834. And the thing is, I love going back into chess history because all these players were so good, and what's old can sometimes become new again. Even though they didn't understand a lot of the opening theory we have now, they were very strong players. And you can learn so much from these great games. So we're going to look at La Bourdonnais versus McDonald. And these two guys were the best in the world before Adolf Anderssen. This was 1834. And they played almost a 100-game match. And La Bourdonnais of France whooped McDonald of Ireland. But it was a good match. It wasn't that close, something like 45-27 with 15 draws. But who's counting? Well, they were. But so anyway, that's fantastic that they got to play so many games, but I heard people were complaining because they didn't have clocks and they had to wait forever for these moves. But anyway, clocks were invented and that solved that. But let's take a look at one of the most famous games. So ready? Here we go. McDonald versus La Bourdonnais. E4, C5, indicating the Sicilian defense. Why it's so good? It controls the center. Now let's go back. Some people have seen this move, the Caro-Kann defense. Well, there's a little joke. Bear with me. It can be called the Caro-Cant defense because obviously, a British gentleman once told me, Black was hungover from the night before, so by accident reached out and played C6 instead of C5. Yes. Why would you play C6 when you can immediately challenge the center with C5? Anyway, it's just a joke. I don't want to hurt the feelings of Caro-Kann players. So the Sicilian is just the reason. It's the number one. And the other number one is E5. Why? Because they're the only moves that really take over the share of the center and don't weaken the king. So here we go, C5. And even back then, they're playing it. Knight F3, Knight C6, and just like today, McDonald played D4. Now let's take a look here. Take, of course, because that's what you're doing. That center is threatening to come run you down. So you take it, he takes, and now let's take a look. White has development advantage. His two bishops can come out immediately, or her two bishops. And Black's pieces are locked in, but Black has something good in return. Black has two center pawns to one, and in the long run, they can really give you an advantage. You'll find out why as you gain experience. But it's interesting to see how this game unfolds. And White is counting on getting his pieces out quickly and attacking Black, probably on the king side because he has a king pawn, whereas Black can often occupy this open file, this half-open file, C file, with a rook. Anyway, let's see what happens in the game. Here, E5, that's played even nowadays, though more normal is to play a move like Knight F6 first. So after E5, I'm not going to make this a lecture on the opening all the way because we're going to mostly look at the game, but I have to explain some things. After E5, White played this move, and this is a mistake. And there's a reason why. But it seems normal because you don't lose time. You trade and then it's your move again instead of wasting a move. But this is the main move. And then sometimes we have the Lowenthal Sicilian, we attack, and he checks you right there. You take, he takes, and White has the two bishops. And, Black can try and trade queens. This is a famous opening. So a lot of people play this, whereupon now this is played, and we have a variation of the Sicilian. you know, another variation. But we're going to look at this today and see why it's a mistake. Now, what would you play here? Pause your video for a second. Okay, unpause. I hope you played pawn, this pawn takes. Then you're correct. You want to capture towards the center. If you take this pawn, he trades queens, and black has pretty much lost any advantage, though black certainly isn't in a bad position. He's going to move his king. You won't need to castle. But you keep this, and then you got potential with your center. And you're going to see. So after bishop here, knight here, already black is threatening to launch the center forward with d5. This move. And let's see what happens. He pins. We break the pin. So white played queen e2 on move 9, and d5 was played. Now, if he were to take the pawn, then simply bishop check, we block, and now he's at bishop's attack. He takes, and now we simply take with the knight, and we maintain the monster center. And believe me, it's going to be good for black, but you'll see as the game progresses even the way it goes. So he could try knight c3, and then watch the following variation. d4, take, take, knight d5, queen a5, check, b4. See, this is a trap. Now if queen takes queen, then he can play queen takes queen, bishop takes bishop, knight check, winning back the bishop. Still, it looks okay for black, because two bishops would kill a rook, but let's see what happened. He goes, bishop takes a5, he goes, bishop takes bishop, pawn takes, bishop takes e2, and now watch. After knight check, he's got really no choice. King here, knight takes rook, and you save the bishop. And if he takes the bishop, if he takes the bishop, king takes knight, and you have an extra piece. So either way, black's going to come out ahead if you examine all those variations, even by yourself, or with a superior game. So here's what happened. Instead, he took on f6, which is playable, comes back, and retreats his bishop. Castle, castle. a5, very good idea. Do you see how he's threatening something? Yes, to trap the bishop, but he has a second threat. Can you find what black can do if white stops this pawn from moving like this? Find black's material winning shot. Pause your video. All right, I'm back. This isn't too hard. I hope you found bishop a6, which is going to win the rook for the queen and give you a nice material plus. So instead, he did the right thing. He took, and now after takes, he played rook d1, and now he's attacking himself, this pawn. But very simple. The center starts moving forward. And now you're going to see that center takes away the knight's best square, right? Well, white played c4. That, again, is a mistake. He's getting a passed pawn, but as you guys probably would do, I hope, you develop a new piece. Now, this is still good for black, but this is better than the game, because we could now play this, and we still retain the better chances with that bishop on the long diagonal. So after c4, queen b6, bishop c2, very clever. And now, I hope, it's time to play a normal move. He played this. A very bad move and a big mistake would have been to take the bait. Grab the b pawn, you immediately lose the queen. Check. Oops. But, okay, so he sets a trap. But look at this position. Black's central space is so outstanding here. It's just, his pawns are just controlling the board. And you'll see if you're on the white side, it doesn't feel too good to be, I'm telling you. So anyway, knight d2, he gets it back in the game. It's certainly not over. And now watch what happens. Rook to e8. Very interesting how he chose that rook. And it's very true that that is the better rook. But why? Why would he keep the other rook bottled up? Just incredible. Here we go, knight here, and now we see bishop d8. He's ready to push his f-pawn to f5 and attack that knight. And you see how both rooks would be in play then? Very simply, he holds on to his two bishops. So c5 attacks the queen. But queen c6, again, I'm sure you've seen this bishop and queen battery, aiming at mates. So the knight cannot come in because I think we all know that's mate. So, of course, he plays f3. Now that opens his king up a little. We're going to see about that in the future. So bishop e7 stops the knight from entering. Rook ac1 veils and looks at the queen. This guy's a great player. But now watch. f5. And now, check. King h8. Watch. Bam. Oh, did black make a mistake? Look at that bishop slicing right through his queen to his rook on e8. And it looks pretty bad. But let's look at the favorable things. Whenever someone attacks you, try to set up your position so you can get something from them. And I believe that Le Bourdonnais allowed this move on purpose. Here's his move, queen h6, and let's take a look at the position. What black should do is at least come down with the knight, not take the rook. And after bishop takes rook, then take this rook. Bishop comes back, c6, e4, amazing move. This is a variation I discovered. After take the bishop, we play check. See how that opens up? Takes, and look at this. We're threatening queen check and devastating mates. It's horrible. Takes, we just go check. And now it's not too hard to see. Check with another piece. Check with another piece. Takes, and now look at the carnage on the board. We've got the king exposed. We've got a bunch of extra pawns for the, and the king is still exposed. We've got every shot of winning this game. You can win this position if you're black. You just have to think if you had enough time, I'm sure. So that's one way to play it. There are probably other complications in there. But that's what white should have played. He mixes up the game. He has a little more counterplay. Instead, he did what 9 out of 10 players would do and what probably your opponent will do. He takes the rook. Now, here is where that old maxim, sit on your hands. Don't immediately reply. There could be a better move than your immediate recapture. And that's where you do what's important. You take here. And the bishop on e8 is still hanging. And you're also threatening to crumble in towards his king side with your bishop and center. Let's watch this. He plays this, blocking your bishop out. You took. This is amazing. He can't take the bishop. If he takes the bishop, can you find a winning series of moves for black here? Pause your video. I'm unpausing now. This should have taken you some time because it's a series, but it's all forced. Queen check is the first move, and wherever that king moves, you check him again. Make sure every move's a check. And then your rook blasts its way in, and it's all over. Here, well, you can do a couple things. You could win the queen with a discovered check here, but better than winning the queen is just mating. Right? So good if you saw that continuation that would be winning. So of course, he realized that he couldn't, and also he couldn't really take back the pawn, because if he takes back the pawn, Then you get the same idea. Queen check, you see? He's exposed. And when you get a guy's king on the run like this, you go after it. You don't let him breathe. Or a girl's queen, right? So let's say here, you check, he goes back. You lift your rook, how simple. It's going to come over and mate him. So that's pretty good. If takes on b7, in other words, if he takes the bishops, if he takes the bishop on b7, you win similarly. Check. All right, like we saw before. We don't need to look at that. So here's what he did. He played rook c2. Rook c2 right there. He's holding things off, you see? And now his queen and everything still hold on. And he's ready to take your bishop. He's still up a rook temporarily. So black is up a rook. So we start with check. Got it? And after king h1, very simple. We save our bishop and we head toward the king side. And now bishop came to d7. Sorry, he wasn't still up a rook. Remember that. We won the knight on e4. So he wasn't up a rook. He was up an exchange. Now, let's see. Watch. The pawn pushes. The threat. If he were to take your bishop, black to play and win, what would be your winning move? Pause the video. Okay, unpause. I hope you found queen here. And of course not takes because you make a new queen, but back. And I hope you found the winning move in this position. The winning move in this position is queen takes rook. And after queen takes queen, you make a new queen, check, or a new rook. He takes, and you mate. So this would all be very pleasant for black. However, it didn't happen. So he realized what he had to do. And he played rook stop, see? So now the pawn starts flooding forward. The rook came here. The bishop took the bishop took back, and now pawn pushes. And now I think you're starting to see, if you haven't already, what I mean about the monster center. That pawn that captured the knight early in the game on c6, and the pawn that captured the pawn on d4, led to your pawns, your extra center pawns, moving forward. And even though it seems like a lot of crazy stuff happened in between, that's what I'm trying to give you, so you can see the bigger picture. After all the crazy moves, the basic outline of why the Sicilian defense is so popular is this central control. And look at these pawns, and right now, he comes down. He wants you to take the queen so he could make a new queen, but instead, he just simply squashes all the play and blocks it. Again, it'd be nice. Let's see. Okay, here's what happened. He goes back. But now, the queen came down, threatening to mate. So, of course, white has to come down with the queen, the rook. And now here we are. And now what would you play as black? We'll unpause your video now. And yes, you see, if one rook takes the queen, it's replaced by another queen. The other rook, it replaces again. So he comes back, and now there's really not. But remember, what should you do now? Pause the video. Well, I hope you did not unpause now. Play this, because then you're rudely mated on f8. So I want you to remind yourself to check yourself before you wreck yourself or check your back rank. So instead, he simply moved over, and he leaves white with no moves. He played this. Luckily, he had that move. And now, can you guess black's next move? Pause the video. Okay, you can unpause. Yep, you found it. The monster center moves forward. And now after queen back, the coup de grace, giving up the queen. And yes, you guessed it, the winning shot. And here you are in a very famous chess position, showing how the pawns are really the greatest pieces in the game. There's sheer power here. There's nothing white can do. If he takes, we just make a new rook, not even a queen. Why would you make a new rook instead of a queen? And I said, I don't know. And the master told me long ago when I was learning in Washington Square Park, he said, because you always let your lowest foot soldier give mate. And so he would take, and that's right, because you want your soldier to give mate rather than the queen or the king if they can in real battle. So let's go back. That move and this position shows you in a recap how this pawn center can become such a powerful force. And like I said, if you look at this center from the other side, you look at this, if you flip the board, you see how difficult it looks for white because the pawns just make it so you can't move around. Anyway, that's a great game. McDonald Labordonnais. Look forward to seeing you in the next lesson. Welcome back. I'm FIDE Master Nathan Resika, and again we're talking about the Monster Center, Part 2. And here we look at Dunayev versus Tigran Vartanovich Petrosian. Tigran Petrosian, the Iron Tigran, was the world chess champion around 1960. I should have the real dates in my mind, but I don't. He was one of the greatest players of all time. His style is underappreciated because he played defensively a lot, but his grasp of chess was incredible. And so here we go, an early game by him in 1946. Tigran Vartanovich Petrosian with black against Alexander Dunayev. Actually, I'm not sure it's Alexander, but it's Dunayev. So here we go. E4. And as you see in the last lecture, we discussed the Sicilian and its benefits and drawbacks. Here we go. He takes and takes. And here we go. Knight here attacks the pawn center. Most natural move is to protect it. And E6, known as the Scheveningen variation. Very popular with Garry Kasparov, other great players. Very strong central presence, and we're going to see how he ends up with the monster center. Hard to see right now. So more piece development, logical. A6, and we'll see what happens with that. It stops pieces from coming to the B5 square there. So just bear with me here. Here, A4, stopping the move B5 in case he wanted to push his B pawn. And so bishop here. Bishop here. Queen C7, a common idea. It controls the E5 square a little more, controls the C4 square, and you're going to see how he develops his pieces from here. The knight moves back. It's a common idea, but it might not have been totally necessary. Maybe white should have just castled. But then black would have challenged the knight anyway with knight C6, so possibly. So he goes knight here, and now B6. Notice how instead of just castling, he sees how he can develop his pieces to their best squares. And we'll see, I think it's obvious after this that he wanted to do his next move, bishop here. And now we see. This is sort of called a hedgehog structure or porcupine. Then white pieces cannot approach to attack the queen because of the pawns. So it's hard to crack this structure. And now we see another idea of queen C7. Black can't get away with pushing the E pawn one square further because the queen and pawn control it. So bishop, now see, well, of course he had to protect his E pawn first. So he did. And now we see black white protects and has a strong central presence. But black, knight here. Now we see. His knight is here, controlling e5 again. The bishop controls the center. These pawns have a great grip on the center. He's ready to bring a rook to the c-file if needs be. And let's see what happens. Castles. Rook c8, just like we thought might happen. g4. Now he's threatening to knock that knight out of the way. And there are not many places to go. So you could castle, but then your knight would have to go back to e8, blocking your other rook in. For instance, if you did this. I don't recommend it here because this knight might have trouble getting back in the game for a while. So instead, how do you think Petrosian made a place for his knight? Why don't you pause your video and see? What would you do with black? Okay, you can unpause, and now knight c5. You're creating a square for your other knight to move to. He took because he didn't want to have doubled pawns on b3, but maybe he didn't have to worry. Also, maybe he didn't want to lose the e-pawn, which is being attacked 3 times now, and that's probably the reason. So he has to take. So this was a very interesting point because white's advancing these pawns. They look aggressive, but every time you advance, you leave your king a little open. You leave weak squares like that. So, yeah, what's going on is this big attack on the e4 square now. And so now the knight must be taken. There's no choice, because if he does this, then we can simply gobble this, and now look at all this. Beautiful. Now we have a monster center ready to advance, and a very, very safe king. So he had to take it. But now, of course, I think from our last lesson, you take towards the center. And now here we go. You now again have 3 pawns to 1, well, two pawns to 1 in the center and 1 close to the center. And let's see what happened. He attacked the knight. Well, we know we created a square for it. And it's very interesting. This is a safe position. So he gains space over here. Rook b8, very mysterious. Well, not really, because now that the c-file is closed, we use the b-file. And after queen d2, bishop c6. See, that's what Petrosian liked to do, slowly improve his pieces. See how he's in no rush to castle? He's also threatening to take here, and his bishop controls that side of the board. Knight a4, interesting. Well, let's see. What would you do if you were black? Pause the video. Okay, you can unpause. The move Petrosian found was rook b4. Very interesting. Looks like it's coming in too soon. Many people might have played bishop takes a4, rook takes a4, going after the win of a pawn. However, I think you might be misguided because look, bam. And now you're attacking the rook and the undefended g7 pawn. Not at all what black had intended. See? So no, Petrosian wasn't after taking that pawn. He was after getting his pieces in and attacking the center again, right? The e4 pawn is now attacked twice. Black protected the knight because he knows he wants to trap the rook. If the bishop takes on e4, maybe he'll end up trapping the rook. Like, I don't know what. Let's see what happens. I could see the computer variation. If bishop takes e4, it still likes black. Well, okay. But black played rook takes e4. And that's what most people might be shocked by. Petrosian sees that his bishop is going to be more valuable controlling those light squares near the black king than a rook would be. A rook would be clumsy there. And you can fool around, but let's watch what he did. Instead, the other guy didn't take back. He said, I'm going to wait. I'm not going to take your rook. It isn't going anywhere. So Petrosian found another great move. Look at this move. You see, he wants to open his other rook up. so we can crack open the game for the other rook and then take, if you were allowed to take here, and open the file. So the guy launched down here. What would you do with black now? Pause the video. All right, you can unpause. He didn't take the pawn. Congratulations. If you didn't take the pawn, which could lead the the king side a little bit weaker and be picked at by other pieces eventually, if he takes. Instead, he keeps his pawn structure integrity, look, and plays this. And this is a move played from years of experience. He keeps his structure sound. It's defended. It's sound. It's not doubled. See, if you do this pawn could end up weak, the king could, and this pawn could end up weak later. So instead, he pushes, and he'd probably make a move like that in a second. You and I would think longer than that. But now we see this pawn is also isolated. This could be weak now. It's very interesting to think and say, do I have to take the pawn? No, you can push it. And after the knight came back, he just defended, left his rook there. And after the bishop took, how would you take back? Pause your video. Unpause. You were correct. And now, again, we have the monster center. We're down material by a little bit. White is down material. He sacrificed a rook for a bishop. But he's got two bishops. And remember what I said in that first lesson about two bishops. When you say, remember I said bishops are each worth 3 1/3 points, but if you have two bishops and they're working on an open board, they're worth more than 7 points. Okay, let's watch. Rook here, zeroes in. Just the monster center moves forward. It's so simple. Everything's protected. He takes. Well, of course, I hope you would take with the pawn. And now the center's like an avalanche of boulders launching their way forward, much like that first game. Well, he did this. What happened? Well, he found this, attacking the opponent's queen. There's not much to do. You can try to wriggle around in a position like this. The center's coming at you, so he didn't even take the knight. Petrosian could have taken the knight, bishop takes queen, pawn takes queen, rook takes, and still been ahead. But he just saw that, look what he looked at here. He said, well, you got to move your knight. And he said, you run away with your knight now. The guy had to. And look where it had to go. And then bam, he bit. And there we go. Another button fell. The bishop came back, attacked the queen. Another button fell. And now here you are. Now you went from down material to up material. Your pawn center is devastating. Believe me, you know, it's so great when you start learning how to use your pawns like this. It's really fun. So he goes here, attacks the queen. The queen slides back. It's funny how his queen is just now so safe. The white squares are totally under control by the bishop and the queen. He moves his queen over. He attacks the knight. And now the poor knight has nowhere to go that's any good. And he could resign. He played this. And after this move, he resigned. And so what I wanted to get through to you here is this is a very instructive game of Petrosian's. We'll follow up with yet another example of the monster center in our next video. And again, we discuss the monster center and another game by Tigran Petrosian, the world champion, and how he attained this against a strong opponent, the champion of Romania at the time. And let's take a look at this game. Sicilian defense again. And I've already explained the basic idea of it. So, every now and then you get a player that plays a slow way. He wants to develop very safely, take his time. Observe how to play against that setup. You just bring your piece out, get their knight here. G6, very good. You see that long open diagonal? Good place to put your bishop. Be flexible about where you put your bishop. Here you go. Bishop there. E6, very interesting. To keep the diagonal open, in this type of position, you can put your knight on E7. Knight comes out to E7. Rook E1. Castle, get out of the center. Okay, no problem. C3. He wants to play D4, possibly. So, but he can't yet anyway, because look how black controls that square with the bishop, pawn, and knight, to only the knight and pawn. So so after B6, we just get ready to bring our bishop out. And notice how we can not only bring it here, we can bring it to A6 too, depending on circumstances. Though normally we like it on the longest diagonal on the board. As we see, bishops love long diagonals, unless they're attacking the king immediately. So knight F1, you see, he's coming over here. This is a system of play called the King's Indian attack for white. And he basically wants to push his H-pawn, bring his knight out here, start attacking the king with his pawns. But it's a long way off, so let's see what black can do. Right here, he now gets in the way. All right, so white played D4, and now he took. And now, if the normal center pawn comes here, I believe this move threatens a strong move in knight D3, among other moves, as well as rook C8. So what happened was his opponent played this move instead, which is usually sort of a no-no, because now you get a little less center control. This square falls into white's hands. And now we don't want to take that knight because that would help the center come forward, you see? So he simply came to E5, and now he's looking at a juicy C4 square or a D3 square. So maybe in the end, white should have taken toward the center with the pawn anyway. But this is very instructive. Bishop G5, he says, all right, at least I'm pinning you. So he attacks you. And now he develops quickly, attacks the bishop on A6. So if we take the G5 bishop, he takes the A6 bishop. No, we keep our bishop. Very simple. He snaps, and plays rook to the center. It looks very normal, right? Now let's see. So this is a basic Sicilian move. Doesn't take a genius. Rook C8. You're controlling C4. You could stick a knight on that square or a rook. And so already you see the pressure exerted on the queen side. So far the opening has been a success for black. Knight E3, he gets the pieces in, he covers C4. Rook C5, preparing to double rooks. But F4, now the Romanian champion attacks the knight on E5. And the knight has to go somewhere. So he decides to offer a trade. Sure enough, he decides to take. And the bishop takes, attacking the queen. The queen came back to C2. The rook came to D8. His idea could be to prepare an eventual D5 pawn move, but not yet for sure. He's just holding on. Petrosian's a master at just holding on to a good position. Queen E2, Queen B7. Now we see. He protected the D6 pawn with his rook in order to pivot his queen over and free his queen to attack the E4 pawn twice. Look at that. So the rook guarding D6. Now we see that was why he put it there. Knight goes back to C2. And now B5, a very good move. Look at what he's doing. He's going to follow up with A5 if he can and start these pawns rolling on the queen side and getting pressure on the queen side. So the rook came here. Rook C4. Well, first he does that. Okay. I was considering just playing A5 there, this move. But certainly I'm not going to argue with Petrosian. So now, A3, A5. Okay, he waited to A3. Now we see what's going on here. You don't want to play B4 yet because he could take twice and take with the knight. So, but eventually, if that one knight weren't there, B4 would be an automatic move. Because look at this bishop on G7. It's laser-like focus down on the queen side. It's called a minority attack, where you attack a 3-pawn group with a 2-pawn group, or a 2-pawn group with a 1-pawn, with an isolated pawn. You're attacking with less pawns, But it's a thematic idea, but you can't do it now. You would lose your rook, as I didn't even see before, right? Or I saw it. So now knight attacks the rook. And this is what the guy said. What are you doing? You're trapping your own rook. And can you guess black's next move? Pause your video. Okay, if you've unpaused, I hope you were listening in the last Petrosian game. Yep, you give away a rook for a bishop. Remember what happens. Boom, boom. What do you get for it? You get two bishops, which are suddenly worth more on this open board. You get an extra center pawn. And you get control of a weak color square complex that you've seen mates happen on before with queen and bishop, if the bishop were behind the queen, right? So it's amazing when you learn to play by giving away your exchange, your rook for a bishop, when you get this kind of position. I believe this position is winning for black already, even though you're technically down material because of these combination of factors. So let's see what happened. It's very simple now. Look at that. So simple. You attacked your bishop with the queen, see, and rook. You just defended it and expanded your brilliant center. Hold on. Wait a minute. Why can't the queen just take that bishop? Oh, because you wouldn't get enough for it. If he tried to give up this, sure, he gets a check. All right. But your king pops up. And I really believe this is good for black. But it is two rooks for a queen, so you might want to consider that. You know, you might want to consider it. However, looking at this check here, what would he do to get out of that? I don't know. Maybe this was the best chance white has. I still like black in this position, but maybe that was the best chance white had. He didn't do it. He played knight back, right? Now let's see how a master works. Hey, what did we say? b4, right? Not only it's helping undermine this knight, but the dark square bishop becomes a monster. This is great. He took, and then here, right? That's the only way. At least he gets a passed pawn. And you see, if he didn't, if he took, look at this position. Now this is a headache. The bishop is alive. Oh, sorry, if he took, oh, yeah, that's it. Exactly, correct. So let's go back. So he got the passed pawn, and at least he has two pawns connected. Queen a7. Oh, Petrosian, now you see, attacks the knight twice. The queen has to protect it. Rook comes to the open file. Look at this. He can't oppose rooks. Petrosian's gaining small advantages. He's so good at that. Now, who was the one who talked about that? I think it was Nimzovich or Tarash. Slowly squeeze with small advantages. Well, you could say Petrosian's most famous contribution to chess, if you had to pick one, was sacrificing the exchange. So so he gave up the rook for the bishop. That's what he's famous for. And he would almost do it on purpose. And he would only get draws sometimes. And we go, see, I got a draw. I gave up the exchange. You couldn't beat me. And later in his career, he was happy with these draws, you know. But watch, bishop here. And obviously the bishop's going to put more pressure on the knight by coming out. Funny, not many players would retreat their bishop, but he sees. It also adds protection here. The knight went here. And now the queen moved to save itself. He didn't want to trade queens. It's better to keep the queen. And now queen came over. Queen went b6 check. He says, I don't want to trade queens now. He comes here. Maybe he was still under the impression he was winning, that he could finally find a way out of this. But can you find, I will ask you now to pause your video and see what you've been learning and studying and try to find out Petrosian's thematic move now that he has his monster center and two bishops. Okay, I'm going to show you the move now, so here you go. I hope you saw his exchange sacrifice, yet another. So now he's going to be down two rooks. He's going to have two bishops for two rooks. But in exchange, he's going to have a monster armada of passed pawns in the center, much like some of the last games we've been looking at. So he takes. Nothing really he can do because that rook was threatening to come in and swing over to the king side and say check. It's amazing. It's almost like this game was composed by a composer named Petrosian in a musical work. So he takes, oh no, the rook has to go somewhere, and he gets the pawn, and now we see nothing's going to stop this dark squared and light squared bishop from just destroying his opponent. Let's see what happened. Rook doubles, right? He had to protect it. Of course, Petrosian didn't take the measly rook on c2. He just adds protection. He wants his pawns. And now he takes, and takes the final pawn. And now here we go. So it's a bishop and 2 pawns for a rook. You are now ahead material. I'm sure Petrosian was sad to give away one of those bishops, but he decided he found a win. He took once, pushed. Whose king is safer? Whoever has more pawns in front of it. He tries to chip away. Do we take? Of course not. We play bishop there and slide our queen over. Notice how the rook can't take, well, the rook can't take on c3 really. I think it would be a horrible position. Let's see, what would he do? I'm not even sure oh, of course not rook. Queen check just wins the rook, okay? So now he took, but in the meantime, queen came over and checked. He moved over. We played check again. Notice how he's making sure he can't take back. Watch this. He sees he can take the pawn back, but he says, how can I really bother my opponent? He checks again. Back, takes the queen, and decides to go into an ending that it's completely winning. Why can't he take it now? I think it's obvious. We pin it, and it's an easy win. So he moves his king up, but then, whoa. Surprising, maybe. Here, king up, here, rook here. He's losing a pawn, but no. So simple. The king takes. And now. And I believe you can do the rest, but here's what would have happened, I think. If he plays this, by the way, he gave up, and it looks just like he's getting back in the game. But I think you just play king here. If he takes, I think you just win by, here's what I would do. I would just, I think, play king over. I mean, how's he gonna stop this? What's he gonna do? Block the pawn from behind? You just move here. You just come here, just goes here. And I think that's all she wrote, right? So there's the first primer on the Monster Center using the Sicilian as a way to get it. I hope you enjoyed it. See you in the next video.